Creepy Stories Volume Number 1. A few years ago, my brother would get a call on his cell phone around 3 a.m. every night. He would answer and it was this hellish sounding noise. Like static mixed with screams. He changed his cell number after a month of this and it stopped. Then after a week or so it began again. The exact same noise. Exact same time. Finally one day he decided to backdial the call. It was an old man that had no clue what he was talking about. Still the calls persisted. If he didn't answer, it would call a few more times. No messages were left. He decided to say screw it. Ended his contract with his phone company, switched to a new one, and then got another new number. You guessed it, the screaming static calls continued after a short delay. By this time he was terrified every night. Unsure why this was happening. He backdialed the number again and got a different person. Around this time, he lost his job and his phone. The calls stopped, of course. His phone was disconnected now. So one day my mom asks me to listen to this weird message she got on our home phone. It was the static screaming. We showed my brother and he was freaking out. He backdialed the number again and it said the number was disconnected this time. Never heard from it again after that. This happened to a friend of mine, she told me about it a year or so ago. We'll call her Minji. Minji is in her late 20s and works as an English tutor in South Korea. One evening, a few years ago, she was tutoring a high school boy. They were up studying pretty late, and the buses stopped running. Being a long way from his house, the boy asked if he could crash on her floor overnight and get the first bus the next morning. Minji was very reluctant, because inviting a teenage male student to stay the night didn't sound like a great idea, but he was begging her and eventually she relented. They went back to her one-room apartment, and she got into the bed, while he laid a blanket out on the floor, and they both fell asleep. A few hours later, at maybe 2 a.m., the boy wakes Minji up. "I'm really hungry," he says, "let's go get some food." Minji opens her eyes and looks up at him in disbelief. "Food? Now? It's 2 a.m., go back to bed." But the student insists, "No, I'm so hungry, let's eat something now." She tells him that there's some ramen in the kitchen, and he can fix himself some. This doesn't satisfy him, he doesn't want ramen, there's a 24-hour place just down the road, let's go there. Eventually, after several minutes of persuasion, the boy gets Minji to come with him to the restaurant. They leave the apartment and head out. As soon as they are on the street, the boy turns to Minji and says, "I'm not hungry. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked under your bed. There's a man sleeping there." They call the police and discover that a homeless man had been living in Minji's apartment, sleeping under her bed, for over 2 months. The boy only saw him because he was lying on her floor, so had a clear view under the bed. The police arrested the man, and thankfully there were no other issues. But that's by far the creepiest thing that's ever happened to anyone I know. My grandfather died last year. When my son was maybe a year old. We had dinner with the whole family every Friday night, so my son had seen him several times. My grandfather was a very quiet, proud man, but when he thought he was alone or unseen, he would make silly faces at my son to get a laugh. A couple nights after his funeral, my son, who liked to crawl into bed with us in the middle of the night, started just laughing uncontrollably around 2 a.m. So I get out of bed to see what's going on, and find my son sitting in the middle of the living room, in the dark, laughing. I say, "Hey buddy, what are you doing?" In toddler speak he says, "Papa funny." I got a little nervous for some reason and went to pick him up and bring him to our room for the rest of the night. And as I'm hauling him away, he says, "Bye Papa," and blows a kiss at absolutely nothing I can see. A few weeks ago my girlfriend and I were sleeping together, when I woke up to her saying, "What are you doing?" She sometimes talks in her sleep, but this sounded so coherent and urgent that it jolted me awake and I asked what she was talking about. She then woke up and said she thought she saw someone at the end of the bed. Thinking it was just a dream, or semi-awake hallucination, we thought nothing of it and went back to sleep. About an hour later, I woke up and saw someone standing on the bed, with the sheets wrapped up and twisted to their neck. I didn't know what to do, but the first thing that came out of my mouth was, "What are you doing?" My girlfriend then woke me up. I had been dreaming the exact same thing that she did, and said the exact same thing. When I was in 8th grade, I went on a school trip that was called the Louisiana Tour. It was mostly going around to significant sites in South Louisiana. One of the places we went was Myrtles Plantation, which is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the country. There are all kinds of stories about the place, but at one point we were standing in a room as a part of a larger group and the tour guide was talking about something, I don't remember what. As I'm standing there, I start to hear what sounds like someone hitting a piano key. After I heard it a couple of times, I started to look around for the source of the noise. I didn't see a piano, but I kept hearing it. So I asked my friends who were standing near me if they heard it. They said no. When I heard it again, I said there is it again and that they must have heard it. They thought I was crazy. So I went back to looking around the room. Everyone's eyes were on the tour guide except for one woman. She caught my eye and pointed at me and then at her ear with a questioning look. I realized she was asking if I heard it too, and I nodded. At this point, the tour guide starts telling a story about a soldier who had died there and that he played the piano and multiple guests had reported hearing him playing in the night. I honestly didn't know what to think. I guess I still don't. I talked to the woman as we were all leaving the room and she had heard the exact same thing as me, but her husband and son had not heard it. I work at the Myrtles Plantation and I have so many of these stories and events that visitors tell me. The creepiest is one, in my opinion, is that you can sleep at the plantation kind of like a bed and breakfast. Well, we have a room that is filled with those creepy ceramic dolls. There is one doll though that was one of the children's favorite and always was in the bed with her at night. The child later died, and the doll stayed on the bed with her. When we started to house guests at the Myrtles, we kept the doll on the bed in memory of the child. The first night when someone slept in the room, they moved the doll to get more comfortable. In the morning, the doll was back in the bed with its hands on the guest's throat. She came out outraged, accusing us that we did something in her room. No one went in or out of her room that night at all. The next guest moved the doll as well, and when he was sleeping, he heard tapping on the wood floors. He woke up and noticed the doll on the floor where the sound was coming from. Everyone who stays in the room moves the doll. The doll always gets back in bed. When I was growing up, one of my best friends told me about a very creepy situation involving him, his younger brother, and a man in the window. When my friend and his little brother were younger, they shared a bedroom. They are some years apart, but his younger brother was born with a multitude of different health issues, including multiple sclerosis, and is confined to a wheelchair and cannot care for himself. So, to keep an eye on him overnight when his parents couldn't, they shared a bedroom. One night my friend randomly woke up for no particular reason and happened to glance over at his younger brother, but noticed something very startling, a strange silhouette of a man wearing a top hat looking in through the window behind his younger brother's crib. The first thing my friend did was jump up and turn the light on, then ran into his parents' room to tell them what he saw. When his parents came back into their room to investigate, his younger brother was having a seizure in his crib. A few of his family members say it was his younger brother's guardian angel standing in the window that night. My friend believes it was death. It's all still pretty unsettling to me. When I was younger, I had an imaginary friend who lived in this massive antique dresser. We'd chill out and I vividly remember him telling me stories, although I have absolutely no recollection of what they actually were. I remember one day talking to my parents about it. Dad traveled quite a bit, so he wasn't up to date with what I was into, and when I started telling him about my dresser buddy, he wanted to know his name. It was something innocent like Peter or Patrick, but I can still see him going white in the face. I drew Peter or Patrick out for him, and the very next day him and my uncle took out that dresser and burned it. It wasn't until a few years later when I found out my dad's little brother, my uncle, also had the same friend with the same name who lived in the same antique dresser. After a few months of the typical imaginary friend shit, my uncle started having night terrors and couldn't sleep because of Peter or Patrick. It got so bad that they had to move him out of his room before he managed to get back to normal. When my son was about 3, he had an imaginary friend in his room who he used to talk to all the time. He would tell us stories about things she would tell him, and we'd hear him chatting to her at bedtime. We thought it was pretty cute. After a few months, my son said he wasn't friends with her anymore. We figured he was over his phase of seeing her, so were surprised to hear him still talking to her at night. Then he started not wanting to go to bed and having really bad dreams. At some point we ended up asking a lot of questions about her. We had assumed she was a little girl, but apparently she was 47. She lived in the wall and he stopped being friends with her because she wanted him to call her mummy. Her name was something like Margaret. She wanted him to come and live in the wall with her. He had told her he didn't want to talk to her anymore and she wouldn't go away. We eventually moved house, and he stopped talking about her. Funny thing is, when I was pregnant with him, living in the same house, I used to have dreams about a lady sitting at a dining table in our bedroom, except it was obviously a different era, and the room was not a bedroom at the time. The lady used to knit and make me listen to her giving me parenting advice, while her two 20-ish-year-old sons sat at the table quietly. I was once featured in a St. Jude's Survivor newsletter when I was about 5 years old in the early 90s. The newsletter went out across the country and apparently into Canada. There was this guy named Mitchell that called my family up out of the blue because he had read my cancer survival story. He lived somewhere in Canada and claimed to be this big-time Christian and wanted to talk to me about God and prayer. My mom let him talk to me for whatever reason, and the guy actually just wanted to talk to me about ALF. This Canadian dude named Mitchell was obsessed with ALF and somehow got a hold of our mailing address and sent me tons of ALF merchandise, coloring books, pencils, ALF everything. For some reason, my parents let him talk to me whenever he would call because they bought into his God stuff and liked how he sent me ALF crap. This went on and off for about a year until he asked me if I had ever heard of John Wayne Gacy. He told me who he was, and that he had escaped him when Gacy tried kidnapping him when he was a kid. He told me I should tell my parents they shouldn't trust strangers because you never know who you could really be talking to. I remember he didn't sound menacing when he said it, just matter of fact. Of course my parents freaked when I told them that, and they changed numbers and called the police. They never really did anything since the guy did live in Canada, and by all accounts hadn't really threatened me. Also, keep in mind Mitchell somehow had our mailing address and knew exactly where we lived. We had plans on moving soon anyway though. Fast forward 10 years to about 2001. We live in a new house, a new state, everything unlisted. I'm now 15. What did we get in the mail? Yes, you guessed it, an ALF coloring book. Weird one that happened to my sister a couple years ago. Background info: she and her, now, husband, are house sitting for my brother's-in-law's uncle. The uncle is old and starting to lose it. He rents out a basement suite and a nice lady lives downstairs. She cleans the house when she is there, but he wanted my brother-in-law to come check on things and feed his old cat once in a while. So first day they go to house sit, they get in but can't find the cat to make sure it's okay. My sister has cats and know they like to hide when they are dying, so they are all worried and are looking everywhere for this cat. In all rooms, under the beds and everything. Even check with the lady downstairs, she hasn't seen it. So my sister opens up the closet in the spare bedroom and is looking around stuff on the floor. Moves a couple of things and sees a set of feet on the ground in the closet, with clothes blocking anything above the feet. The feet have nicely painted toenails and look human, but she assumes it is a doll or something. They look in a few more places and all of a sudden the cat is in the middle of the living room just hanging out. So they lock the deadbolt and leave. Sister and her boyfriend go out for dinner and a movie, and she can't stop thinking about the feet and how real they looked. My sister had started dating her boyfriend fairly recently and didn't want to seem crazy, so she didn't bring it up, but a few hours into the night she decided she needed to tell him. He decides that it's probably a doll, but he offers to go back and check anyway. When they arrive, my sister will only stay on the patio because she is scared, which makes him realize that this must be something serious. They go to get in the door, but the deadbolt is now unlocked and the handle is locked. Now he thinks there must be someone in there. At the door there is a fireplace, so once he is in there, he grabs the sharp poker stick from the fireplace tools, and starts to sneak towards the closet. He opens the closet and sees the same set of feet with painted toenails on the floor. He pokes it lightly with the fire stick and the toes scrunch up. He proceeds to smack the foot as hard as he can with the sharp stick and yells, "Get out of there!" Out comes a lady in her mid-30s, holding the cat and a can of Coke. Turns out she was friends with the basement tenant. When she became homeless, the friend let her stay with her until she found out she was addicted to crack. Started leaving drugs around the house and had shady people coming into the house, so she kicked her out. Somehow she got a key to upstairs and had been staying there while the uncle was gone. Police were called and she was arrested. One of my mom's friends bought an old farmhouse about a year back. They have a 3-year-old son. The kid had an imaginary friend named Kevin. He would play with his toys in his room and talk to Kevin. His parents didn't really think anything of it, considering the age of the kid. It got weird after they started listening to their son's conversations with Kevin over the baby monitor. It seemed like something a 3-year-old wouldn't regularly talk about. The kid was kind of goofy, so they didn't think much of it. They asked the kid about Kevin. He said Kevin is nice. He is a farmer. They figured that was because this kid loved to play with toy tractors and they had just moved into a farmhouse. Then things got real. There was a shelf mounted on the wall of the kid's room that was about 5 feet off of the floor, opposite of the bed. One morning, the parents go into the kid's room to find one of the stuffed animals that was on the shelf on the kid's bed. They asked him how he got the rabbit. The kid said that Kevin got it for him. A few months pass and things like this happen every now and again. Nothing that couldn't be reasonably explained. Since they moved in, they had found a church in the area and got involved in a Bible study with a few other couples from their church. They decided that they would host the Bible study one day. When they were setting everything up, they gave their address to one of the couples that had lived in town for a while. When they gave their address to the older couple, the wife looked at it and said to her husband, "Hey, isn't this Kevin's old place?" Apparently a man named Kevin used to live there. He ran into some financial troubles. He sold most of his land to the neighboring farm, but kept the small patch of land that the house was on. He suffered from depression and had a bit of a drinking problem, and eventually hung himself in the house. Their friend from church knew Kevin, as it's a small town in Iowa and everyone knows everyone. He found a picture of Kevin and gave it to my mom's friend. The picture was of Kevin and 3 other guys that Kevin would meet with to have coffee and talk about farming. They showed the picture to the kid, and the kid pointed at Kevin and said, "Hey look, it's Kevin." They moved.
Thanks for watching. Keep enjoying our videos. Like and subscribe.